Welcome to Leadr Podcast, the ultimate destination for medtech insights, leadership inspiration, and the latest innovation. I'm Steph Pliha, founder of Tribe Agency and your host for Leadr Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 18 of Leadr Podcast. Today I am talking with Rajat Paharia, honestly one of the kindest and warmest souls you'll ever meet. He's the former Google innovator and now founder of Ask Steve. We're diving into his journey from big tech to his own tech startup and exploring how he's revolutionizing AI tools. Let's get into it. Okay, well, we are finishing a lively series on AI and automation, and I'm super excited to introduce you to our next guest and our final guest in this series, Rajat Paharia. And I had to practice that so I didn't butcher it. It is episode 18 of Leadr Podcast. And Rajat, thank you so much for joining us today.
Stephanie, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So I always start off conversations on Leadr just on how we met. It usually always has an origin story to LinkedIn, but this one actually doesn't. It's a network that was built within LinkedIn, but ultimately I was referred to by a colleague of mine who I've had on the podcast the last couple of episodes, especially around this AI series. So Spencer Jones had told me about Ask Steve as we were diving into the subjects that we were going to discuss on this podcast. And then I had reached out to you because I always want to know about all of these different solutions. There's so many out there right now, as I'm sure you're very aware, that I wanted to just get more insight. And you were so lovely from the get-go and just very informative and really hands-on with your product. And it was such a nice interaction. So I'm like, you should be on our podcast. So here you are. So I didn't introduce you correctly, but he has a software called Ask Steve. We had alluded to it in a couple of the previous episodes, but here is Rajat in the flesh. He actually built this software, Ask Steve. And so I do want to talk about that. But before we do, I want to talk about just your origin story, because I think that's always important for our audience to hear. How did this come about? Where were you before? What's your background? And how did we get to current day?
Yeah. So I spent 8 years at Google working as a product manager. And while I was there, I worked on several different teams. I started on the Nest team working on consumer electronics. Then I worked on the Maps team working on maps for real world games like Pokemon Go style things. And then,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know, it was fun. And then I worked on the augmented reality team working on smartphone augmented reality as well as smart glasses. And then my last role there, I was on the internal HR technology team, which was the team that managed all the software for Google's 180,000 plus employees. So compensation, hiring, performance management, learning and development, a mix of homegrown and purchased software. And it was while I was on that team that ChatGPT exploded. And all of us were looking at that LLM technology and going, we should be integrating this into our software suite. Like, we can make managers more effective, recruiters more effective, employees be able to do all their performance management tasks easier if we could just integrate this stuff. The only problem was, number one, I had two major problems. The first was that I didn't own half of the systems that I was trying to integrate into. And so I couldn't. It was Salesforce, Workday, or something like that. And then the other was I just didn't have the engineering capacity. Like, I had all of these engineers on my team, but they were all allocated for the entire year. And so when I left Google in early 2024, I was like, there's got to be a way to figure this out. And the solution happened to be a Chrome extension. This enables you to kind of aftermarket add AI in at the browser level. So you're not having to figure out integration into every individual piece of software. And once you can do that, then you can add AI capabilities to anything. And you can give users the flexibility to do it the way they want to versus the way that the software vendor might want to. So I spent several months building that just in my little home office in Arkansas. And now I've put it out in the world and I'm trying to get people to use it. And very exciting. It's an exciting space. And I'm excited to build something that I hope a lot of people use and find value from.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when we had our first conversation, you kind of gave me a brief demo, which I know we're going to go through today, but I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. It's so crazy how much is out there right now that people just don't know about, which is really why I wanted to start this conversation for our viewers, because there's just there's a lot out there that's junk. Yeah. The fact that you were at Google as long as you were and just recently left, I mean, it's within the last year that you left, I think is huge street credibility. And then I forgot to ask you, you're an engineer by trade, right? What's your
By,
educational background?
yeah, by training. So my career has been very unplanned and random. But I
Yeah.
started as an engineer. My education is computer science, undergraduate and graduate degrees. But then I worked as an interaction designer at a company called IDEO. Worked as a product manager at Google. I was an engineer for many years early in my career. I think I always tell people I'm an engineer by mindset. That's kind of the way I think, and I like to build things. And so
Yeah.
after 8 years of Google of decks and docs and meetings, when I left, I was just like, I just want to sit down by myself and build something and
Yeah.
have fun, because that's my happy place.
I agree with you. And before we get into Ask Steve, because I definitely want to showcase your platform and what it brings to the viewers, I do want to kind of talk about something that you just mentioned, which is entrepreneurialism. And how did you always have that entrepreneurial spirit? Or is this something that you always had an itch to scratch, or was it really dormant and it just kind of came alive in you? Tell me about that origin.
So I did my first startup back in 2005, I think. It's been a long time, but it was during like the Web 2.0 days.
Yep.
And that startup lasted for 10 years. It was a venture-backed startup, grew to close to 100 people, raised tens of millions of dollars in venture capital. And it was an interesting journey. And so after that, though, it was also a hard journey. 10
Yeah.
years of like scraping for every dollar and being in a startup that never quite hit escape velocity. Right. It was one of those like the kind of the nightmare scenario was like it didn't just totally tank and it didn't, meteor off like a rocket. It basically was just kind of one of the living dead, like constantly getting enough money to keep alive,
Right.
but not to, and you constantly see that like just around the corner, maybe we'll have some success. And, it just went on like that for a very long time. So after that, after 10 years of that and having kind of 3 kids and writing a book during that period of time, I was so burnt out that I spent a year and did kind of nothing. And then I wanted the pendulum to swing the complete other way. I was like, I don't want to be in a situation where the whole fate of the company is on my shoulders. I want to be a tiny little gear in a giant machine. And if that machine grinds my little cog to dust, it's okay. The machine will roll on. And so
Right.
I went to Google, where I was a tiny little cog in a big machine, right? And so, but after 8 years of that, then the pendulum swung back, and I'm kind of like, oh my God, every time I want to get anything done, I have to convince 100 people, and I'm spending all my days in meetings, and the percentage of work about work is like
Yep.
90% and work is 10. And that's the
Right.
exact opposite of the way I want to be. So then when I left, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go. It's amazing the amount of leverage that a
Mhm.
small team can have now compared to 10 years ago with
Yeah.
tools that are available with AI. And so I'm like, I'm going to be a bootstrapped solopreneur, not raise any money because I did that venture capital thing before. I don't want to do it again. Don't want to have a team. Don't want to have to convince anybody. Don't want any coordination overhead. I just want to work by myself. And so I did it, and it's been super fun and super non money making.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Welcome to the world of being an entrepreneur. Well, it
yeah,
sounds like you were already once before, but like you mentioned, you were VC backed. So they definitely are a controlling arm and have a lot to say with your day to day. And so I'm just always curious. I too was at a point where I was a cog in the wheel, and I did that for a long time. And I was very happy to have that opportunity. It afforded me the experience that I have, financial backing that I could put into my company. But I get that you and I have kind of arrived at a similar point where we're both very creative and energetic and like to move things quickly. And in the world of corporations, they don't always move at the speed of light like we want them to. So even just meeting you when we were first met, you are definitely an entrepreneur at heart, and you have very creative, energetic, vibe too. So I'm so happy for you that you took the leap back into this world, and I'm super excited to see what happens with Ask Steve. I think it's just scratching the surface of your abilities. So on that note, let's talk about it. Let's talk about, first of all, what is the use case? Who's your primary audience for this product?
sure.
And then also, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your product with us, we can kind of get a visualization, because this will definitely be on YouTube, and I want people watching versus listening to get a chance to take a peek into the world of Ask Steve.
Yeah, for sure. So, if you follow the conventional wisdom, I'm doing everything wrong, and I'm going to continue to do everything wrong because, like, well, why not? Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to,
Yeah.
the
No
conventional
one's judging you, right?
Yeah, that's right. The conventional wisdom is, before you start the business, go out and do all your customer research and validate and like do this and this. And I was just kind of like, I'm going to build the thing I wanted when I was at Google because I just really needed to build something. And
Mhm.
so I did that. And then, in terms of who's my audience, like this is the a bit of a struggle because like who's the audience for ChatGPT? The audience is everybody. Like everybody
Everybody.
some
Right.
benefit from the thing. And Ask Steve is basically a different user interface layer for that kind of technology, which means everybody can use it. So currently I'm targeting three major roles. One is just end users. If you want to use Ask Steve to make your life easier and better, use it. You can use it for free forever with a free Gemini or Mistral account. Businesses that want to make their employees more effective and efficient, especially by connecting to their own internal large language models or to internal software systems. And then even website owners that like have a site, let's say you have a recipe site, a community site, whatever, and you want to add some AI capabilities to that website, but you don't want to build it all yourself and you don't want to pay for it. You can tell your users to install Ask Steve and some custom skills or buttons that you create. And like within 30 seconds, your users have AI tools available on your website. So
How
I'm
cool.
going after
Yeah.
all of those right now.
I didn't know that last part. I know you'd mentioned the other parts when we spoke. Another thing that you didn't mention just now, but I want to make sure we highlight is it's enterprise friendly. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So most browser extensions, most AI browser extensions, their business model is effectively they are metering your usage and charging you based on that usage. And in
Mm-hmm.
order to do that, you've got your end user's computer, and then you've got their system, and then you've got the LLM, and everything goes through them back and forth. And that's how they make their money. They charge you per API call that you make. They sell you credits or tokens or something. But that's not good for enterprise deployment, right? Like no company wants all their information going through some random startup's servers where it can be
Right.
monitored, saved, shared, whatever. So I built Ask Steve from the ground up for what I knew, like having just lived in Google and enterprise technology for 2 years. I knew that the best way to do it would be end user's computer talking directly to the LLM, the APIs. I'm not metering anything. And so I don't charge based on that. I charge just on a seat model. And
Mm-hmm.
that makes it totally secure for enterprise deployment. It can also be customized and branded for your company for internal deployment. So it doesn't have to be Ask Steve inside your company. It can be Ask Sam at Walmart or Ask something else at some other company. So yeah, built from the ground up to be kind of customizable, private, and secure for enterprise deployment.
So you just mentioned something that I wrote down to ask you, and I think because of what you just said about Ask Sam that I might know the answer, but what is the origin behind Ask Steve? Is it Steve Jobs?
No, it's not. It's actually so there's this Wharton professor named Ethan Mollick who writes a lot on
Okay.
LinkedIn about LLMs. He actually wrote a book called Co-Intelligence. It's really good. And he wrote a post about a year ago saying that like, thinking about these large language models as like some kind of technology isn't the right thing. You should be thinking about them as infinite copies of a graduate student named Steve. And like he's really good at some things and not so good at others. And I thought that was super funny on the one
Mm-hmm.
hand. On the other hand, I really like this like mental model of like grad student or intern. Like, it can help you, it can do a lot. You should always check its work and a good way of thinking about the way this thing can help you. And so I just came up with Ask Steve.
I love it. From a branding perspective, I approve. I like it because just to touch on branding for just a hot minute, I love things that are abstract, but also provocative and curious. So if you're too literal, if you're just saying I'm an LLM model that works with enterprise, it's not that engaging. It's
Yeah.
not provocative. It doesn't make people curious. And so I like that it's a little bit of a story behind it for when you're asked, but it's not obvious, right? And it has like a little ring about it. There's just something about it that's very appealing. So you nailed it on your branding from my perspective. But since we've done a lot of talking about it, let's talk through it with some visuals, if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk me through it. This is your baby, so I want to make sure we give it the time.
Yeah. So when you first install Ask Steve, what you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen is this little purple tab and these three buttons. And these are called skill buttons. And these allow you one-click access to AI capabilities. And so by default, you get these three. One is summarize this. So with one click, you can get a summary of any web page. So here I am learning about pandas on Wikipedia. You can use PDFs. So I can get a summary of this Alphabet earnings report, and even YouTube videos you can get summaries of with one click. And now this is currently giving you a 5 bullet point summary, but if you want to edit the kind of summary you get, you can easily do so. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. Now, the second skill that you can use is visualization. This is chart this for me. So I'm going to select this paragraph of information about the city I grew up in, say chart this for me, and then I'll be asked what kind of chart I want, and I can give some additional information, but I'm just going to say okay, and it's going to take that data, send it to a large language model in the background, which is going to generate a chart for me and give it back to me right where I'm at. So the key things to notice here are, number one click access to AI. Number two, it's happening right where I'm at in the flow of work. I'm not having to bounce back and forth to a chat window in another tab. And then the third is it can see the contents of my page. So it was reading that Wikipedia page. It's reading the content that I'm highlighting. So I'm not having to copy and paste back and forth. And then this last button that comes by default is the do something button, where I can basically just ask for anything that I might ask ChatGPT. So I highlighted that same paragraph and I can say, make me a table. And then it will give me a table of that information that I can then copy and paste somewhere. So super fast access to AI wherever you are in the flow of work. And these things are completely customizable. So if we go look at them, I'm going to open up the Ask Steve side panel, click on skills. And if we look at the summarize this skill, we can see this is exactly what it is. It's just a prompt, and that prompt has a variable in it. And so it can take whatever's selected on the page, or if nothing's selected, the whole page itself. And so here's the prompt. Here's some text I want some help with. That tells it to grab the variable, and then I give it my instructions. So if you want to change this, it's really easy. You can say, always give me results in Spanish. I can't type, but Spanish. And then if I run that, now my results are in Spanish. So you can
That is crazy.
any way you want right there. If I hit update, then it's done, and my button is now in Spanish. And if I want to make my own, then what I can do is I can go click on new, and I can say make hashtags, and I'm going to ask it to generate 5 creative hashtags for this text. And then I'm going to tell it to grab whatever I highlight or the whole page. And so then if I hit save, now I have a button that appears on every web page, and I can just press it. And with one click, I get 5 creative hashtags. So these things are called skills, and it's super easy to create them. It's just writing in English. It's like writing instructions like you would to an intern or something. And then it's so easy to like add your own buttons to these pages. Now
That is cool.
Yeah. And now you can have specific buttons for specific websites too. So here we are on your profile on LinkedIn.
Hey.
We can see that on LinkedIn, I have 2 additional buttons that are only showing on LinkedIn profile pages. As a salesperson, one qualifies a sales lead and the other writes a personalized sales outreach message. So in this case, pretend I'm selling road mapping software called Roadrunner. It's saying that you're actually a very good qualified lead. And then if I press the W button, it's going to write a note for you about this. That was weird.
That's crazy. I mean, if I were in my sales days, this would be a no-brainer, honestly.
Exactly.
I know there's ways to automate, bigger campaigns for a much larger scale project, but for day-to-day, you find someone on LinkedIn, you want to drop them a quick note or drop them a quick DM, and you have it all at your fingertips without really having to bat an eye. And like you said, you don't have to log out and go into a different tab, and cut and paste back and forth. It's all in the screen. That's insane.
Right. Exactly. So you can stay in the flow of work, not lose all that time, and not all the bouncing back and forth. And just like the other ones, these are totally customizable for you. So I can go find this, write a sales outreach message, and we could change my name and the product I'm selling and all the details and update, and then it's customized just for you. So now the other things you can do with Ask Steve are you can get writing help. So here I am in Gmail. I've written an email in just some crummy bullets and bad English, and I can click here to open the Ask Steve writing helper, say improve this email, and then it will just improve it right there in Gmail for me. So I rewrite it for me effectively into better. And so I have some users that are like non-native English speakers, and
Mhm.
one of them told me he saves an hour a day on emails just by doing this because he can
Oh,
write.
I bet. I
Yeah,
bet. For translation purposes, I think that's a no-brainer. And
exactly.
I think I asked you this last time, but because the audiences weren't on, or the audience wasn't on our last call, I want to at least say it again.
Yeah,
So, from a brand perspective, I know with chat, the limitations are it does like a very robotic response, but you can educate it and train it to know your tone, know your brand, the way that you position things, and kind of give it background prompts on educating on what you want that to look like. Where do you put that into your system?
yeah. So you can put that in a couple of different places. One is you can just do it in the prompt itself. So I have the improve this email prompt. It's a very simple
Mm-hmm.
one. It just says make this better, but you could easily just say, and here are some examples of my style. Uh,
Okay.
or my brand guidelines or whatever, and include those
Right.
in there so that it has those as reference. Now,
Okay.
that you're doing on a per prompt level or per skill level. The other thing you can do is there's this notion of preferences. And preferences is things that you want Steve to remember about you, and that's either data or instructions. So you could put in all your guidelines here. These get sent with every request to Steve. It's kind of like what he should know about you in the background.
Right.
And so that way you just do it once and then it gets sent with every request.
That is awesome. Even, with the LLM models, they don't have that as obvious.
That's right.
I'm battling right now with chat on, I constantly have to remind it of things that I want it to do. And it seems like it remembers for a while. I don't know if I'm out of memory or what's going on there, but
Yeah.
it'll go back to kind of these robotic answers. Then I have to coach it again on, no, use simple and common language. So the fact that you have it available and it's kind of the overarching style and anything you want it to remember in one place is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's super helpful actually. And so like even if you're looking for a job and you don't want to have to put your resume into every prompt that evaluate my resume against this job rec, write me a cover letter for this resume, for this job rec, etc. You just put your
Yeah.
resume in that one section once and it just knows it every time.
Yeah. I think where you're going to get probably the biggest pickup in value is in LinkedIn. I think so many people spend so much time there, and it's, where every business it lives, and it's the best place to network, I think, and best place to do business for people that are in the B2B market. So there was another thing that you had shown me when we spoke last. It was on like a registration page for like a conference,
Yeah.
and that part was really cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
you have it already teed up. Perfect. Yes.
here, I've got the list of speakers for a conference, and there's a couple things I can do. So one is, let's say I want to copy all these people into a spreadsheet or something. Ordinarily, if
Mhm.
I try to do this and paste, it's going to just be a bunch of garbage in one cell. But what I can do is I can run one of my skills, extract the people information from a web page. And what it's doing now is it's reading this whole page and giving me name, role, company. And then this isn't even on the page, but it's constructing a LinkedIn search link so I can get to that person's profile really quickly. And now I can copy and paste this into Sheets or Excel and get everything in the right rows and columns in less than a minute, what ordinarily would have taken me 30 of copying and pasting all these people by hand. And then we can see I can just click on one of these people and go to the first link, and there they are. I got to them on LinkedIn really fast. Uh,
Wow.
Okay, so the other thing you can do is with Ask Steve is you can connect to any backend API, not just
Mhm.
LLMs. And so in this case, I'm going to pick Colette here, and then I'm going to click the Add Lead to Salesforce button. And what it's going to do is it's taking this data that I highlighted, it's calling a backend API. That backend API is saying, I've got this unstructured data. Let me figure out what is the name, what is the role, what is the company, so that I can write those things into the appropriate fields in Salesforce. So now if we refresh our leads page here, we can see we have Colette added here. And then let me pull out the company name and query HubSpot for all my other contacts that are at that company. And let me check my open orders for that company in my order tracking sheet. And so with one click, I interacted with an AI and 3 enterprise software systems and got all that information pulled back to me in a single pane of glass without me ever leaving the page that I was on. And so you can, with Ask Steve, you have the capability and the flexibility to do that now.
And that is really the enterprise solution. I mean,
Exactly.
that's back when I worked at Intuitive, this would be invaluable. I mean, you're constantly looking at pages, you're constantly looking at meetings, constantly looking at speaker panels, registrants, sponsors. And this is just a no-brainer, especially if it's connected to something like Salesforce. Was that an add-on, or does that come with your native
Yeah.
Ask Steve?
So calling an API or a premium LLM is part of our premium plan. And so that is
Okay.
part of the paid plan. The free plan, you can connect to Google Gemini's free program or Mistral's free program, and you can use it free forever. But if you want to connect to a paid large language model or an on-premise or on-device large language model or an external API, like I just did with the Salesforce example, then it's the premium plan.
Okay. All right. Well, unless there was other things to mention on the actual share your screen conversation, I'm curious about the future of Ask Steve and what's on the horizon for you. Where are you looking to take this? What is the big long range plan here?
Sure.
I'm curious. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing. I know some of it probably is confidential, but.
No, absolutely. And I can show you one more use case that I've actually been using a lot recently.
Yeah.
So I've been writing a lot for like publication in news articles and things like that. And I found that actually using it in Google Docs is super helpful. So I can sit there and I can say, what do you tell me how to improve this? And it will read that text and give me some suggestions. Or like, let's say I get to my final paragraph and I can say, give me 30 options for rewriting this. And that's the great thing about LLMs is like you can get infinite variety. And I can read through these and I'm not going to like a lot of them, but there's going to be ideas here that I'm like, oh, that's really good that I can then.
Right.
And so I found myself doing this a lot, actually, having this chat side panel open while I'm in either Google Docs or Word 365. And just whenever I need help with a word or a paragraph or a sentence, just asking for it. It's been super helpful.
That is really cool. It's like having your grad student, Steve, sit next to you and go, hey, what do you think of this paragraph? What are your options? How would you change it? That's awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I do a ton of copywriting, obviously, with our company, and I'm constantly in and out of chat. And I don't use it to actually write the copy because I find it's get a very obvious look to it unless you've trained your chat otherwise. Yeah. But what it helps is unblocking writer's block.
That's right.
It helps you put together like a guide or, the outline. And I find that to be invaluable when you're just trying to speed through a ton of products and content that you need to get completed. It's just unlocking that block. And, so we're not saying to use chat to write everything. Well, it's definitely a great co-pilot. It's a great assistant. I'm in it all day long.
Yeah.
I mean,
I totally agree with you. The kind of augmentation rather than replacement, right? Don't do the job for me, but help me do the job.
Yeah. Or at least help you start the conversation with yourself. And, I find value out of it almost daily. It'll come up with something that I hadn't even thought about as far as ideas. It's a great way to like brainstorm with yourself, but having like a secondary opinion.
Yeah.
So exactly. I find it to be invaluable, which is why I really launched this whole series, but that is super helpful. So any other tips and tricks on Ask Steve, but I do want to hear about the future.
Yeah. In terms of the future of Ask Steve, technically, like I've been working on the product for a very long time, and now I need to get people using it. That is like my number one goal, scale. And that scale is in those three areas. And you mentioned earlier that you hadn't heard of the third one. That's because the third one didn't exist like a week ago. It's amazing the speed at which like I have an idea. And I actually asked this question on LinkedIn yesterday, which was like, what happens when it's easier to build the capability than it is to do the research about whether you should build the capability?
Right.
Like, do you take the time to go do the market research to say, or do you just build the thing? And I've very much been inclined to just build the thing, especially if I can do it in like a couple of days, which this whole site owner thing was like, oh, I wonder if I can make it so that like somebody who has a Squarespace site or a Wix site or some other site with like just copy and paste some code into their site and bam, like they've got AI added to their website. And do I know if that's a good market? I don't actually, but it didn't cost that much for me to like build the thing that I can then use as my tool to find out the answer.
Yeah. Well, so, I have an opinion on that. If you're curious,
I would love
it comes up a lot. So my entire client base is startups and innovators that have a great idea and need to commercialize it. And so we talk about this all day long. I am a big fan of market research, but I think when you're at a point where you're approaching scale or even just prior to commercialization. And I know you're already commercial. I would deal with med tech startups where they have to apply to FDA and go through a lot of regulatory tape. But in that early days, I applaud creativity. I feel like if you get caught in analytics, it's the paralysis analysis conversation. So I applaud just going as far and wide as you can, just to, one, scratch the itch of creativity, but two, to really explore without burden where you want to go, stay in that like creative flow state. But I do think there is a point where you really need to understand the compelling need in the market and fill that need. And that's where like a really clean go-to-market strategy, which includes a competitor analysis and also like really truly understanding the voice of customer, what's out there and how you can niche your way in and leapfrog your competition, which I've seen multiple times with multiple corporations I've worked for. Yeah. If you really understand what you're getting into and you understand the market inside and out, you will literally leapfrog and shave years off your adoption of your company. So I am a proponent of research, but here's my fun solution for creative minds like both of ours. Because trust me, I don't want to get bogged into market research either. But what I would say is especially given your solution, you can do them in tandem. You can stay free to be me and also be doing research on the same side, right? So you could have your Ask Steve running research for you, give a go-to-market on this solution or, look at the top 5 competitors in this lane. How are they approaching it? Find ways to exploit their SEO on their websites, give them all of the websites and look at their SEO strategy, just so you can be placed on Google, which you know very well, above and beyond them. So there's ways to do it in tandem without stifling your creativity and ambition. Yeah. But I do think it is important because you will get to a point in your adoption or not where you'll plateau potentially. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And usually it has to do with you didn't understand the voice of customer or you didn't really understand the unmet need. And there is an unmet need in this audience, but maybe it wasn't the area that you thought, right? Yeah. So that's always that like little hurdle on market research. But I understand fully where you're coming from. Market research is boring. But the good news is we have things like Ask Steve that could literally be your grad student and right. Literally you don't have to pay them and they could be running that query all day long until you feel really comfortable that you've exhausted at least the legwork on the market research. And then it's a matter of, finding key opinion leaders that you could have live conversations with or doing a poll or doing a research or doing a Google form and really understanding it a little bit more critical. And you could even do, send it out to 100 different people, get 100 different opinions, and then grab that, throw it into Ask Steve, have it aggregate, put it in a table, all the things. Yeah. So you've got the keys to the castle.
That's right.
Anyway, that's my opinion.
No, that's great. That's super helpful. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, in terms of technology, I think the product is in a good enough state, that I need to be kind of pencils down. Even though it's so much fun to be writing and doing this. And my focus going forward right now is go to market on those 3 different areas, just trying things in every single one of them. And the enterprise side, I think my number one goal will be in the next 6 months, can I get 3 pilots just up and running so I can learn something and hopefully get some good case studies that I can then use to leverage up even more.
Meaning like a soft launch, identify 3 enterprise companies that would take it on as a soft launch?
Yeah, exactly. To launch it internally, try it out and see if it adds value to their employees. Because I firmly believe that this kind of thing inside a company, companies are struggling with AI adoption today. If you look at May Habib, the CEO of Ryder, gave a presentation earlier or in late 2024 about if 10% of if you are using Microsoft Copilot to summarize your emails once a week, you're in the top decile of Copilot users. This stuff is just not getting used very much.
Yeah, right. I know, especially in the enterprise world. I think I mentioned to you when we first spoke, I am all in on AI. I use it all the time. I am constantly searching the new tools, which buyer beware, there's too many out there and a lot of them are shams, but there are quality apps out there that really solve problems and I would definitely seek them out. But I was talking to my husband one of the nights when I was geeking out on AI all day. And I said, you've got to use AI. Like, he was walking up the stairs this morning, grumbling about something he had to do. And I said, have AI do it.
Yeah.
It was like a response to some kind of email that was contentious. And I said, throw it in there, tell it to remove all the emotion, have a pragmatic response, yet be assertive and firm. You know, there's so many opportunities to use it.
Yeah.
But I think the Achilles heel in his world is you can't dump private information from your company into this open model. And so I think what you're saying is you're solving for that, right?
I'm helping solve for that, in that companies will either need to decide it's okay to use a paid Anthropic AI model or run their own internal model. But then, even then, like, now it's a chatbot in a different window. And how often are employees going to think to go use that? Whereas if you integrate it into the flow of their work where they're already in Workday and Salesforce and LinkedIn and whatever they're doing, then all of a sudden, like, you've unlocked that barrier to them using it. So the phrase I use for the enterprise is like, it's the last mile UI for enterprise AI, right? Like, that's the thing, that little last piece of glue that will get people actually using that AI that you spend so much money and time trying to roll out inside your company.
Yeah. Wow. My brain's just spinning a mile an hour because I'm thinking about all the different use cases. So outside of what you've laid out in kind of our brief demo, what functionality do you feel like would be a game changer, whether it's within Ask Steve or any other AI solution out there, or any other LLM solution out there from your perspective?
I think to me, the big unlock was like connecting to other APIs, because when you connect to just a large language model by itself, what can it do? It can like take the text you give it, it can manipulate it somehow, or, you know, synthesize it somehow, and then give you back a text response. But it can't really interact with like all the other systems that it might need to, whether it's Google search or your internal Salesforce implementation or Tracker or whatever. Like, when you connect to an API though, and you can connect to all those things, but also have AI pieces in the middle, like, that's where I think the AI is like so valuable, right? It's like doing those steps that in the past as an engineer, I would have been like, this is impossible to do. Like, you know, that example that I showed you where I highlighted that person on that page and I sent it to Salesforce and it wrote it as a Salesforce record. I could highlight a person and it could be any format, like name, role, company, name, company, role, name, missing company, name, / dash, dash, whatever, like a bazillion different formats. You could never write code to like take that and figure out what is the name, what is the role, what is the company for every possible scenario. Impossible.
Right.
But now, like, one line of AI saying, hey, AI, you pull out the name, role, and company.
You figure it out.
And it does. It's like this amazing little black box node that you have now, that when you integrate it into a bigger workflow of like, you do that, then write the thing to Salesforce. Now I want you to write me a really nice message back to the user. Like all of a sudden, like, it unlocks so much capability that I think it's amazing.
You know, it's funny. And this made me realize how little I know in this world. So yesterday, based on what you just described, I have a bunch of different mundane tasks that I'm committed to solving for with AI and automations in 2025. I'm like on a mission. So yesterday I had a list of things. And so I was going back and forth with chat on, here's my entire tech stack. And here are all the different things that I do that waste a ton of time on my end that I could be doing other things for my company that would be much more meaningful from a revenue perspective. And so I started with just like simple tasks. There was one about, what was the one I was trying to figure out yesterday that I failed miserably is the end of this story. But basically I was going back and forth. Chat was trying to tell me, no, do this, do that. And I was using Zap in the middle. And then I was using AI. But again, you have to give it your API key. And it was much more significant than I thought it was going to be. I'm like, I thought I was like, okay, I understand, you know, to a degree how to connect Make with Zap with, or not Make and Zap, but, you know, Zap with my software, my other API. And anyway, it ended up taking me like 4 hours and I tapped out. After 4 hours, I'm like, what a colossal, I should have asked Steve, or I could have just sent it to you. You'd figure it out in 3 seconds. So I think there's a degree of curiosity from the lay person like myself, but there is a complexity piece that you can't minimize. And I do think there's a lot of solutions out there. Like what I ended up doing with this particular scenario that I just described, I used Lindy.ai, which Spencer also told me about. He's also an AI geek, and it already had a pre-done automation for exactly what I was trying to solve for. And so instead of building it myself through all this like makeshift integrations and Zap, it had literally just laid it out for me. And so that's my point is it's amazing what can be done, but unless you have 8 years at Google, it doesn't always work out for you.
That is true. The cool thing that's happening is like the Lego blocks are getting bigger, right?
Yeah.
So as an engineer for many years, the Lego blocks were very tiny. The Lego blocks were like, learn how to write JavaScript, like do whatever, or Python and stuff like that. And now the Lego blocks are like, now you've got things like Make and N8N and Zap, or Zapier that like the Lego blocks are getting bigger and you can wire them together. But even then, like there's now a new level on top with, I don't know if you've seen these tools like Bolt.new or V0 and others. And these are ones where you basically just say like, I want a website that does X, Y, and Z, and it generates it for you. And then you say, no, make this bigger. And like, it's like one giant Lego block then, right? And it's
literally builds a website.
Yeah. It can do It can do the whole thing for you, give you like working code. And so you're hearing about people like not using Figma as much anymore because they're just like working directly in this tool that is like building you the end result at the end of the day.
I know there's so much going on in this space. I'm just here for it. I'm, sitting back with popcorn, waiting for this all to evolve and make sure that the Lego block is big enough where I can actually handle it myself. And then keeping in touch with people like you in case I don't. So, what else do you think that you've done as far as research? What do you think's the next big thing to solve for? Or what do you think the next big AI or automation even workflow, let's call it, solution is on the market or coming soon, if you had to guess?
Yeah, I'm it's so interesting that, the last couple of days have been all about DeepSeek and like, every time a new model comes out, a reasoning model, whatever, like the world goes a buzz. But it feels like it's so kind of ahead of itself, right? Like it's like the snake hasn't digested the initial elephant yet, right? Like there is still so much.
That's a good visual.
There is still so much like opportunity and potential to extract out of even, ChatGPT 4.0 mini and Claude 3.5, Haiku, like all these existing models that hasn't been realized yet. Right? You keep seeing these reports about like $600 billion has been put into the generative AI market and like, nothing has come out really right in terms of value yet. And yet people are kind of running full steam ahead into these other things. And so, and then, so one is just like, it feels like there's a giant opportunity to take what's already there and like make it useful because make it
useful or make it better or make the Lego piece bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right?
So I think there's great opportunity there, which is kind of in the space that I'm playing in, right? Which is like that user interface layer of like, how do I make this stuff actually useful? I think there's a ton of opportunity there. And that message has been, also promoted in the last couple of days because of DeepSeek, because people are basically going, this basically like, if nothing else, this shows that like the place to be is the application layer, right? The layer above all this stuff with like Gemini and ChatGPT and DeepSeek, because those guys are all fighting out in their multi-billion-dollar battles, and like let them fight it out and let them drive the prices to zero, and that's fine. You don't play there. You play up here at the like part where you're making that stuff useful and more valuable, even though that runs counter to the like what you kept hearing at the first. Initially, which was like, oh, that company's just a thin wrapper on top of ChatGPT. They're going to get obliterated. But I think if you find the right niche and add the right value, I think you can build like a really interesting, good business there.
I agree. So I think the three things, at least in my lens, that need to evolve or need to have a better user interface or even honestly become turnkey or plug and play for the novice users like us, right? We're not you and you're unique, but a majority of people, one, either don't have the time to learn a new skill set, or two, they don't even know where to start. Even if you're having ChatGPT educate you, it's still not a foolproof solution. So for me, the 3 lanes that have not been perfected, I think you had mentioned that they're like the uneaten elephant or undigested elephant. There are several solutions that have the right intention, but are not fully baked yet. And it's around creating images.
Okay.
It's around creating video, and it's around security. Those are like the 3 things that if I were a key opinion leader on a market research, I would say those are the 3 things to solve for and do them really well.
Yeah.
It's solving for security, because my fear is I'm dumping so much information in there, and where is it all going? Where is it being housed? How is it being policed? Is it public? Is it not public? Is it private? That's a huge concern. And I think the bigger the company, the bigger the concern. And the videos and images, at least the ones that I have found that are out there that say they're the turnkey solution on generating images or video, I would say it's ish. It's ish. It's not perfect. Unless I'm missing something, feel free to enlighten me. But I know there's HeyGen out there. I know there's, what's the other one? Dolly through chat. They're not great. They're not great. And they look like AI created them. They have a very AI-esque look to it.
Yeah.
If I had to put a 4th tier out there, I'd say copywriting that doesn't feel like a robot. Because if I have to see another blog or another social post that says in the golden age of, it always starts with IN, every sentence.
Oh yeah.
In the digital age, in the era of, in that. I actually have in my prompts now, don't use the term that starts with in anything.
Interesting.
Remove all robotic context to your copywriting. But yeah, I mean, I think there's so many lanes that are underbaked, but they're all starting. I know in 6 months, I would say a year, but I would say even in 6 months, this conversation that we're having right now will be null and void.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It will be completely solved for.
Now,
anyway,
on the security side, have you tried running a local model? Do you know what that means?
Because I don't know how. Know how, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple of tools that make this very easy.
Okay.
And it kind of depends on what you want to do. But the one I use, the one I have up running on my computer right now, is called LM Studio, LM Space Studio. And it's an app. You download it. I have a Mac. It probably runs on other.
I do too. Mm-hmm.
And then you just you pick the models you want. So I downloaded the DeepSeek R1 model last night.
Okay.
Because I wanted to try this, and the best way to try it is on my own computer. And so I download it, and then I'm running the model on my own computer, and I can connect Ask Steve to it. I can chat with it. I can do whatever. And then there are other apps like it that even allow you to chat with your own files and things like locally. And I'm happy to send you a list of some of those. But there's
we'll drop them in the show notes. Yeah. So when you send me over your bio, will you send me links to what you had referenced? Because I think it'll be important for everyone that's listening to this to get access to it. Especially, I'll definitely have you drop links for Ask Steve and how they can participate in this fun thing we call AI.
Sure.
Okay. So I do want to give time for the last 3 questions of the infamous podcast questions I ask every guest speaker.
Okay.
So in a speed round context, I want to ask about a mentor that's made an impact on your career and on your life that you'd like to give a shout out to. I'd like to know about a business book that's made an impact on you. And some people use business fiction or nonfiction. I don't really care. Whatever book has impacted you and we want to share to the audience. And then lastly, the superpower, because everyone has one.
All right.
So start in whatever order you want.
All right. Superpower. My superpower has always been clarity, being able to take a lot of information, synthesize that, and kind of cut through the noise and figure out what are the bones of this problem? What really matters that I can go after and address? And I enjoy doing that. It's fun to do that kind of stuff.
And not everyone has that, by the way. That's not a natural superpower, including myself, for many. They get caught up in the detail and they don't just drill down to what actually matters to solve that problem.
Yeah. I mean, I as I mentioned, I was a product manager for many years at Google. I managed other product managers. Mm-hmm. That was the skill that the really good ones had, right?
Yeah.
They could hone in on what actually mattered very quickly.
Yep.
In terms of business books, or books in general, there's like one phrase that has stuck with me for probably like 20 years, which is like never confuse activity with progress. And
I
I
love
first
that.
read that in the book called The Monk in the Riddle by like an old venture capitalist named Randy Commissar. And that's from a very long time ago. But that phrase is just, it's always just lodged in my head. Like, what am I doing right now? Am I actually like making progress toward a goal? Or am I just, doing something just to be doing something?
I call that burning daylight. I actually
Yeah.
think Dr. Phil might have used that original phrase, but I used to manage a team of reps all the time. And I had ones that would work half days, but got twice as much done. And then I had people that were out burning daylight all day long and got nothing done.
Yeah.
And I said, which one do you think is better for our company? And this was like to a group of managers that I had. And I said, the one that gets it done in half the time, because they're less expensive. They're not accruing expenses, staying in hotels or burning gas or, doing all the things. And if you can get your job done in half the time, I'm all about it. It's all about production, the production of it, not on the actual time.
That's right.
You're not on a time card or a time clock. So I love that. So the book's called The Monkey and the Riddle.
The Monk and the Riddle.
Oh, The Monk and the Riddle.
Yeah.
The Monk and the Riddle.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Last one, mentor.
Last one, mentor. So there was an IT guy who worked at my startup. And I remember distinctly one day we were interviewing a candidate together, and the candidate wasn't kind of meeting what we were expecting. And then we kind of walked out to debrief afterward while the candidate was still there. And I'm just like, yeah, let's just say no. And he's like, you should tell them why you're saying no, and you should give them the opportunity to respond. And I was like, oh, as someone who just like didn't want to be in the uncomfortable situation of like giving that kind of feedback, like that was just, I don't know. I was so surprised. Like,
you're like, really? Why do I have to do that?
I should do that. And I went back in there and did it. And I was just like, oh my God, this guy's so right. Like, why have I been avoiding these kind of conversations like my whole life? Why am I not sitting there just saying like, this is the truth of the matter. Like when I asked you this question, you didn't answer great. I'm going to give you a second chance. Like, help me understand, like that kind of thing. And it was amazing. And so I've just tried to do that for the rest of my life after that.
I love that. What's funny is I've interviewed probably close to, 500 people in my career, maybe more. And I used to give feedback in my early leadership days, but I found it was kind of obnoxious because they would find a way to argue with me. And I was trying to give them insight so they could pack up, take it, and go on to their next interview, not to try and fight for the job that I already decided in my mind is not a good fit for them. So I kind of vacillate with telling them the truth, which is probably the best and most productive thing for them. But not all the time do people actually take that and go, I really value your feedback. Thank you so much. And just let it go, right? They want to argue with you on your opinion. So that's where I have a hard time balancing. Do you tell them why? Because I usually within the first 5 minutes, sometimes 30 seconds of an interview, I know they're not a good fit, Well, anyway, I'm glad that was sage advice for you and you've applied it to your life and found just to be more candid, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also a great book called Radical Candor. I don't know if you've read that.
Kim Scott.
Yeah, it's great too. Very similar conversation around just it's best for everyone to be radically candid.
Yep.
All right. So Rajat, thank you so much for taking your precious time out of your day to be on Leadr Podcast. I know it's a little bit of a deviation from our normal audience of medtech innovation, but I do think if anyone's in medtech and they're not on the AI automation workflow bandwagon right now, you are missing the boat.
Yeah.
So I really think you should dig deep. Hopefully we've given you throughout this entire series things to think about, ways to apply to your business, and just do better in 2025. Do less, say less, and get more done, right? So how do we get a hold of Ask Steve? Let's give a shout out to your product and how do they find you? Is it on LinkedIn? Yeah. I want to put it in the show notes as well, but what's the best way to interact with you and your product?
Sure. Yeah. You can go to the website and download it for free at asksteve.to, like ask Steve to do something for me.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can reach me at Rajat at asksteve.to, or please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on there a lot. As you mentioned, that is like the place where I get a lot of my work done.
Right? I know it's so easy now. It's like a virtual marketplace for, I mean, it's like a live conference all day long.
Yeah.
Instead of having to, fly and go attend all of these crazy conferences, it's like every single day I meet new people, find out cool things, and have tons of conversations that I probably wouldn't have been able to have in person. So
Yeah, that's great.
anyway, such a pleasure to have a second conversation with you. And I really do appreciate you being on. And by the way, I do want to give a plug out. I've got a discount code that Rajat and I had determined, Tribe 50. I'll put it in the show notes. If you're interested in joining on the Ask Steve bandwagon, check it out. We're giving you some discounts, and I think the rest is history. So I can't wait to follow your journey and see where you take this company. And I'm excited for your entrepreneurial path and doing things that you love and being creative. I applaud you and look forward to seeing this, how this evolves.
Thank you, Stephanie. I really enjoyed
Yeah,
being.
absolutely.